Hello, and welcome back to the Empathic Leader, where we talk all things empathy, EQ, emotional intelligence, and leadership. And I have a guest today that's a little different than most of my guests, and I'm sure you're going to love because this woman knows leadership and she knows self-leadership on a very personal level. I'm so excited to have her here. I can't even say. So the thing to start with is how she opens her website, which is opportunity shows up when you do. So this already gives you an inkling of the kind of self-driven, motivated entrepreneur person that she is. Samantha Kris is a best-selling author, certified reinvention practitioner, and award-winning speaker. And she has the #1 TED Talk on goal setting, which is how we met, was through TEDx. She is not your cookie cutter keynoter, and that's a fact. I mean, she follows her own path, and that authenticity goes through everything she does. Samantha is known for her ability to create highly tailored, interactive experiences that inspire connection and propel action. Now think about that, especially, all my leaders in the audience. How many times have you been to a function or a keynote or that kind of thing, and basically someone talked at you, as opposed to actually having it be interactive? I mean, it's a whole different skill set, but you learn more and you remember that way. Samantha also supports some of today's leading impact-driven CEOs and thought leaders in the development and delivery of their speeches, as well as their communication strategy. And Real Leaders Magazine recognized her as a top executive coach for 2024, and Microsoft named her as a leading speaker to follow in 2025. You know who else is on that list? Mel Robbins. You're known by the company you keep, right? Cool thing about Samantha, she is always evolving. She started with her TEDx and her book, but she continues to find new and innovative ways to serve leaders and businesses everywhere while always remaining true to her authenticity. So help me welcome Samantha Kris. Hi.
Hello.
Welcome. We're so glad to have you, Samantha.
I am so glad to be here.
Cool. Oh, well, let's just dive in then. So you have been a lot of places and you've done a lot of things. Give us just a short background, how you got from point A to point today.
I've been asked this question so many times that you would think I have a more succinct way of sharing this. I'm going to share as brief as I can give you, and then let's see where it takes us.
Totally.
Started as an addictions counselor. I was 19 years old. It was my first professional experience, my first job right out of college. And I was working with men and women battling with addiction older than I was in most cases. Very quickly realized after a lifetime of putting all my eggs in that basket, thinking that was my career, that it wasn't for me. And at a really young age, I got hit with what felt like my first existential identity crisis, wondering if not this, then what? If I am not an addictions counselor, if this is not the way I am providing impact and serving the world, then how will I do it? And in a rather unlikely turn of events, I was on a car ride with a girlfriend of mine saying, I just don't know what I'm going to do. And she said, well, you really love people and you're great at organizing. Have you ever thought of wedding planning? To which I responded, never, not once have I thought of wedding planning. But I just needed something so different. I needed to feel creative. I wanted to try to dip into a skill set that I had never really explored before. And I thought, what, better way to do something that allows me to explore parts of myself that I've never really given any airtime to. Fell in love with it. I did it for 4 years, and it's what opened the door to a corporate events position where at that point I had a friend of mine who said, I just want the referral bonus, and I've got this position that's been really hard to fill, and you seem like you've got some transferable skills. What do you say? And at that point I had addictions counselor and wedding planner on my resume and thought, hey, let's go for it. If it's not for me, I have a career in wedding planning that I really love. But if it is, then maybe there's more to discover about myself. Should I pursue it? Stepped into that world, got 5 promotions in 5 years, fell in love with corporate, really grew up in that space, and understood, I think for the first time, truly how lonely it was to be at the top and the demand on leaders to steer the ship, and how difficult it is when you have the livelihoods of people, depending on the decisions that you're making. And I really, really enjoyed getting to work very closely with the executive team. And that's really where the light bulb went off in terms of entrepreneurship and thinking if I could serve one company and work with the leadership team, get to travel the world with them and help them navigate some changes, which is kind of how my role evolved. What happens if I were to explore this at scale? So I got change management certified, really doubled down on the communication side of change, and sought to help leaders, so business leaders and thought leaders, to better anticipate, navigate, and communicate the impacts of change. And here we are.
Wow. See, I just learned all sorts of cool things about you just now that I didn't know. One is that we actually both have a background in change management. I didn't realize that. Yeah. Yeah. I'm certified too.
Very cool.
I know at one point you had talked about that you were also involved in the fitness industry. And
yeah,
I mean, kind of briefly in and out. And I was too. I used to be a personal trainer. So there you go. So the moral of this story is in order to be a TEDx speaker, you have to have change management and personal fitness on your resume.
And then not talk about it very much. And people just kind of figure it out in this roundabout way.
Sure. Why not? I mean, just so everybody knows, right? That's what you need.
Exactly.
Man. Well, see, but I appreciate that now we're talking about self-leadership. You were able to take these opportunities, right? Opportunity shows up when you do. You took these opportunities and you didn't go, oh, no, I didn't. You said, well, yeah, maybe. Well, let's give it a shot and see. What's the worst that can happen? So
it's interesting you say that because I used to have this mentality where I really like to flip the script and say, well, what's the best that can happen? And instead of, hey, the worst that can happen is in fact not so bad, and kind of demystifying it and becoming a little less afraid of it, was more so about turning around and looking at, if I think about what's the best that can happen, it opens a very curious mindset. And opportunities show up when you start to think about best case scenario that otherwise wouldn't emerge if you thought worst case scenario. But what I found particularly interesting over the last couple of years in therapy, my therapist has encouraged me to also not lose sight of worst case scenario, because then what happens is we keep that curiosity of best case, but then we can start to plan for worst case in the event it does go that way, because life is not all butterflies and rainbows. No. In the event worst case scenario is in fact our reality, if we have had the foresight into, going down that path, we can start to plan for some of the roadblocks that may inevitably pop up. So now I find myself somewhere in between where I think worst case about what could possibly happen, but I put my energy and focus on best case so that I can spot those opportunities sooner, seize them when they become apparent, and create them when they're nowhere to be found.
So it's kind of a mix of an offensive and a defensive mindset.
A little bit, yeah. I've never thought of it that way, but I love that.
Yeah, which is super cool because you don't lose sight of either one.
Right.
There
was a quote, I don't remember who said it, but it was that opportunity is at the intersection of preparedness and luck. And I think by focusing on worst case scenario, you've got that preparedness, provided you are actually, taking into account some of the obstacles that can come your way and figuring out ways to get around them. And that luck really is, I think, generated from the energy that you put into investing best case scenario, because there are certain things that you may not be able to plan for, but that by simply opening kind of, quote unquote, the energetic door for them to find you, you get a little luckier when you operate from that space.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. As someone who came from the other side of things, because I was always oh God, I got to prepare for everything that's going to go wrong, which you are prepared, but can be overwhelming too, because I mean, how many different options can you come up with? And being able to get out of that mindset and more into what is the best that could happen? Suddenly you see opportunity where maybe you missed it before because you were too busy looking for the worst possible case.
Exactly. And one of the things that you and I have talked about, which is an analogy I often go back to, is worrying is like paying tax on a debt you don't know.
Yes.
You can worry all you want about worst case scenario, but you're paying this tax on a debt that may never be yours to pay. When in fact, that energy can be allocated into things that, doors that can be open for you.
Yeah. Which is actually very cool. That's actually been a paradigm shift for me, because it's like, why am I paying on this? I don't owe anything on this. Exactly. I'll pay it when it's due, if it's due. So yeah, it's funny because you and I do kind of come from the same way, but like from different points of view, which is like, I don't know. I like that. I like people that open up my point of view, you know?
Likewise.
So let's talk about your corporate. You talked about being in corporate for 5 years, that you had 5 promotions in 5 years, which is fantastic. But you also had the opportunity to work with a lot of leaders and probably, I'm assuming, also be in a leadership position to a certain degree yourself, right?
That's right. Yeah. So I was actually in corporate for longer. I think that 5-year window was just where I saw the most rapid growth in terms of what I'm capable of as a professional, but also my role changed so frequently over the course of those initial 5 years that it served as a really solid foundation for what would be the next, I would say, 5 to 7 years in corporate before ultimately making the shift into entrepreneurship.
Okay. Well, I appreciated that you were already talking about having that responsibility for other people and thinking of other people, which, I know my audience is probably sick of hearing it, but empathy isn't about feeling. It's about connection and understanding. And I'm going to keep saying it until everybody gets it.
Yeah.
So the fact that you were already thinking about people and seeking to connect and understand their point of view in all this tells me that you did use your empathy as a leader. So I wondered if you could give a time, maybe when as a leader, you really did have to employ this and seek to connect and understand. And it might have been through feeling, it might have been cognitively, it might have just been as a human to human.
The first thing that comes to mind is when I was in the situation for the first time where I had an underperforming team member. And as a first-time manager, I didn't really know how to navigate that situation. And I defaulted to communicating and leading in the way that I want to be communicated and communicated to and led.
Mm-hmm.
And as someone who is really driven by results, I went hard on performance. We're not performing. You're not performing. How can I help you? We have a target to hit. We're going to fall short. And completely missed the mark. It just did not resonate with him. And for the life of me, I couldn't really figure out why. And it was only in doing a little bit of training, not only self-reflection, but actually also getting some guidance from people who understood leadership far better than I did at the time, that I recognized that is very much what motivates me, but that's not necessarily what motivates everyone.
Yeah.
And B, when you meet people where they're at with what moves the needle and their key motivators, you're able to spark something in them to empathize better, to communicate better, to connect better, ultimately work better together towards a desired outcome. So when I understood that he was actually very, very driven by people, I completely shifted my approach and said, hey, whatever's going on right now, like, we're letting the team down. There are people who are trusting us to execute on certain things, and they don't feel confident in our ability to deliver because, we've not been able to maintain, uphold our promises to them. Like, what's going on? And so when I completely shifted my approach to, hey, people are, I wouldn't say upset, but are concerned. Their trust is starting to erode in our team and our ability to deliver. And it's hurting the overall perception of what we're able to do, the impact that we're able to make in this company. Let's talk about what's going on. Completely changed the game. And this is a lesson that I have held on to throughout my entire career. And, really coming back to, not everyone likes to be communicated to the same way. Not everyone likes to be led the same way. Not everyone is motivated by the same things. And the sooner you're able to identify what motivates people, then you can communicate and lead in a way that's more effective. So I think that was probably one of the earlier lessons that I learned on effective communication, but also meeting people with empathy instead of pushing my agenda of performance and my own motivators.
Yes. And that's actually a fantastic example, because when we talk about connection, when we talk about understanding, and the idea that organizations are made up of people, and it doesn't matter what the organization does, it begins and ends with people, that you were able to meet him on his terms, as opposed to on your terms or on the terms that you had been taught to use or whatever.
Right.
I think that really sets the difference between a manager and a leader. Someone who manages just kind of makes sure the machine works. A leader actually has vision and strategy, which means being able to connect in that way.
Absolutely. And when I think back to that time in my career, I think that's really at least a period of time where that shift from manager to leader really started to happen. And continued to serve me throughout my career, because I would then go on to work with, a few fast growing tech companies, working predominantly with engineers and developers. And so it was really helpful, not to overgeneralize, but they're not necessarily, in my experience, typically the overfeeling, people-centric, motivated group. And so my approach of how are you feeling? And our team doesn't feel like they're being supported by us wouldn't have worked with that. And had I not learned how to identify what motivates people, I think I would have really struggled in being effective leaders and an effective leader in that environment as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So out of curiosity, what happened after you were able to figure out how you needed to approach him?
Well, I mean, to your point, I think that connection really started to build. And what he saw was an attempt from me to really recognize his individual needs, and felt really seen, really heard, really supported. And I think, truthfully, my approach of pushing results created some unnecessary friction, because it almost felt like I was stating the obvious. We know we need to perform, but there's something that isn't working, that wasn't being addressed. We have ended up being such great friends. In fact, I was just speaking to him last week, and this example was probably 12 or so years ago. And I have brought him into other organizations that I've worked with on my team as well, because we have that mutual understanding of how we communicate, how we can get the best from working with each other. And we've gone on to be really great friends.
So the empathy ended up working in both directions.
Big time. And, I think that's really important, because it would have been really easy for him. And we hear this all the time. People don't quit jobs, they quit bosses.
Yep.
It would have been very easy for him to say, you know what, you just don't get it. Like, there's a misalignment of values or communication styles. And he, as much as I, stuck it out to understand what motivates him, he put an equal, if not greater amount of work in understanding where I was coming from, my communication style. And then what I think became incredibly helpful was an open door feedback system, where it's like, now that we know that we have different styles, it became less intimidating to say, I see what you're trying to do here. It's not effective with me. Without that triggering any kind of defensiveness, we could very openly say, super appreciate what you're trying to do. What would help me in this situation is XYZ. And then having the ability to, and comfort in having that dialogue consistently.
Yes. And I love to hear that, because it just shows that once that street is open both ways, just how much can come out of it. Mm-hmm. I mean, all of a sudden, all the other emotional intelligence skills can come along: communication, motivation, self-motivation, all of it. It just all goes together. But it starts with that ability to understand and connect one way or the other.
And I think what also helps kind of bring it to the next level, and it was around the same time, actually, I attended a conference maybe a few years later. Jay Baer was one of the speakers. He's a big thought leader in the customer experience space. And one of the things he shared from stage was, no response is a response. And that has stuck with me for years. So if you are asking for feedback as a leader on a project, on a campaign, whatever the case is, and you get that feedback from your team, from your customers, not responding to it sends a very strong signal, true or not, that you don't care. And so it is possible that the feedback given is just not actionable right now. Perhaps it wasn't detailed enough. Perhaps it's not relevant to the goals. But by not reciprocating that communication and saying, here's why we can't move on these things right now. Here's why this is not a priority. Here's why this is not something that we're able to, allocate funds or energy to, because XYZ. We give them visibility into what else is, the kind of more aligned with the direction that we're going. Then they start to feel part of, oh, I see, as opposed to, hey, I took this time, I gave you the feedback, you didn't want it. And I think this is especially pertinent when it comes to leadership. When we ask our team, hey, can you give me some feedback? We get it. We say, okay, thanks. If we're not going to address the blind spots that they've pointed out to us, or we're not going to ask them to elaborate and open that door for that two-way communication, I think it's not only insight lost that you can potentially act upon as a leader, but it kind of shuts down the conversation with your team, and it sends a signal that this wasn't important enough for me to work on, or at the very least communicate why it's not something I can work on right now. And I think over the last several years, that second piece of not just opening the door for communication, but for creating the dialogue, it's as to, the details of the feedback has been especially helpful.
Yeah. Okay, leaders, all of you out there, are you hearing this? This is important. This is gold. Don't lose this, because it's true. And as someone who's had suggestions or thoughts or whatever just kind of ignored, I don't offer suggestions again. So,
Exactly.
why should I bother? If nobody else cares, why should I care?
Exactly.
And you're modeling that from the top, whether they like to think about it this way or not. As a leader, you are always on stage because someone is always watching.
Right.
Always. So no response is a response. And the message is loud and clear, even if the actual words aren't.
Exactly. And I think where I struggled with this, at least early in my career, was ego. You get feedback of, hey, that didn't land as well as you thought it was, or this wasn't, as clear as you thought it was, or this actually hurt my feelings, that I didn't feel seen in this situation, or well led. The vision wasn't clear enough.
Yeah.
It's not always good feedback to receive. And especially in the early days where you feel, at least I felt like I had something to prove. And I really wanted to continue to climb the corporate ladder, and I wanted to show that we were doing a good job. It's one thing to say I'm open to feedback, but then you get the constructive criticism and you're like, did I really want that? Now you kind of open Pandora's box a little bit. And so I think the caveat that I would add is not just being open to receiving it, but being prepared to act on it.
Would you say maybe there's a vulnerability component there?
Absolutely. And I don't think that this came easily for me, not only being vulnerable, but receiving that kind of feedback. I always joke, I'm open to feedback, but let me make sure it's positive.
Yes.
I think it's true, especially early on in my career. And it does require a great degree of vulnerability to put your ego aside and be open to turning over some stones and seeing what's under there that needs to be addressed, what's under there that I can work on. And I don't think that asking for that feedback without initially building the trust with your team will be as effective as it can. And so I think coming back to empathy and connection, like fostering that kind of culture and environment makes the feedback even more meaningful, but also help in the event your ego does get in the way, to help kind of keep it in its place as you start to evolve, because that's really what it was. And I think there was some shedding of old beliefs and assumptions of who I ought to be as a leader that I needed to put down.
Yeah.
And the trust and communication and connection with my team helped me do that.
Plus, I would think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but through that trust and communication, instead of feeling attacked, you would feel supported. My team is giving me this feedback, but it's in a supportive way. And now we can fix it, as opposed to defend and, put up the barriers.
Right. And I think, one of the things I would say in more recent years that I learned in terms of just being open to feedback and being a better leader, I had such a resistance delivering negative news. So I have no problem saying, as a team, there's a performance issue or we need to fix this and work towards it. But to tell someone that, their decisions or their actions kind of resulted in us collectively dropping the ball, I had a tendency to sugarcoat that a little bit. And as a result, back to your point of it kind of starts from the top, and the way we show up informs kind of our expectations or how our team perceives the way they ought to show up. Yeah. That meant I was getting sugar-coated feedback, because if I had difficulty delivering constructive criticism in a way that was straight to the point and helpful and very clearly understood what the issue is and how to fix it, I was not getting that feedback. And so even though I had created a culture, an environment of feedback, it was the candy coated version. And so we were all kind of hovering on our true potential, but not really fully crossing that threshold because I wasn't modeling how to have those hard conversations. So that was something I think, a later discovery that has further unlocked my ability to truly empathize, communicate, and connect.
Yeah. Brene Brown says that clarity is kindness. And that sticks with me because it really is. Because I'm that person too. I will try to sugarcoat things. And it's like, but I'm not being clear. I'm not allowing this person to reach their full potential because I'm assuming they're going to react to this the way I think I might. And number one, there's no guarantee I would. But number two, maybe they're ready for growth. Maybe I'm holding them back.
Right. And that perspective changes everything.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's fast forward a little bit because in that space, you were the leader, you were in front, and now you're in a space where you're still the leader, you're still in front, but instead of leading down, you're leading up.
Right.
You're doing stuff for major executives and big companies and that sort of thing. How do you feel your application of empathy within this leadership paradigm is different, if at all? Maybe it's the same skill set, just directed differently.
That's a great question. I don't know that I've thought about how the application is different or that it is even. I think what is different, I take that back. As an executive in an organization, I think I lacked empathy for the executive team because they were my peers. And I don't say that I had no empathy. Mm-hmm. I just think that I have it to a higher degree now because when I was in the weeds with them, I think there was a certain level of expectation that because we were a team and we were figuring this out together, that, or I'm coming into an organization that the established executive team should have a vision. And we get back to all the shoulds, right? Which are kind of the enemy of excellence. But I had a lot of expectations for the team I was part of in a way that I don't have with the executives that I'm supporting now as a coach. And I wish I would have been able to bring more empathy to the team that I was part of, because now that I'm kind of, quote unquote, the outside looking into organizations, I see the executives for the people that they are, not just the team members or the leaders of the organization I'm working for.
Yeah.
And the difference, has been is that they come to our sessions and their guards come down. And because of the nature of the work in storytelling and helping them prepare for their speeches, either for, their industry, their board of investors or their board of advisors, their investors or their team, they're able to kind of express some of the hardships as they navigate how they want to tell their story. And so I see a much more vulnerable side of them than I did in a 9-to-5 work environment. And I see the way they come to the sessions feeling, sometimes really defeated, sometimes really excited, sometimes really upset over an employee matter. And these are all emotions that I didn't really have access to when I was part of that team, that I almost dismissed could have been a possibility behind closed doors. When I was part of the team, it didn't occur to me that a lot of these feelings and decisions and lack of direction was being brought into the meetings, the strategy meetings that I was part of. Now, again, outside looking in and having the privilege of working with some of them on a more personal level, seeing how that impacts the way that they lead has given me so much more empathy for what leaders are faced with, the pressure that's on their shoulders, and their desire for impact, and it's, so I think it has actually changed quite a bit on second thought.
See, I find that interesting because the other thing I'm hearing in what you're saying is that maybe there's a lack of self-empathy as well. I found that leaders that are really high self-actualized, gunners, motivated, driven, they'll drive themselves and take on that responsibility harder than anybody else. But because of that, they don't have the self-empathy to be able to say, I can't judge myself on this. Instead, it's like, I'm going to judge myself harshly if I don't get it. Mm-hmm. Or, people don't need to drive themselves as hard as I do. Well, if I can drive myself this hard, we can drive ourselves this hard.
Right.
So with that lack of empathy, that lack of self-empathy, it can be harder to show empathy. And it's not because anybody's a mean, evil person. It's just the opposite. It's because they don't treat themselves with empathy first.
That's a great point. And I think that was hugely prevalent in that environment. I don't think I was operating with a ton of self-empathy at that time. And even though the nature of my work is very different than a lot of the executives that I support, having the experience as an executive and now being able to be in more of a coach and consulting role, I am the one responsible for, the vision, the direction, the strategy at a kind of on a solo basis. And so again, the nature of our work is very different, but I'm able to, I think, tap into a level of self-empathy that I've needed to create and foster for myself in this season of my life that I didn't have at that time when I was part of a team. So I think you're right that part of my ability to meet them with greater empathy is the fact that it has developed within me more so in the last few years, probably than it ever has been.
I think that's the perfect point to wind it up. So this has been fantastic, but I do have one more question for you.
Yeah.
Okay. If you can think of one leader, alive or dead, known or unknown, that influenced you and how you lead, who would it be and why?
The first person that comes to mind is Arlene Dickinson. She is an entrepreneur, an author. She has, I think she's among the Fortune 500 group. She's on the Canadian version of Shark Tank, which is Dragon's Den. So she's the dragons. And she is someone who has reinvented herself time and time again. And, that's a whole separate tangent, but reinvention is something really close to my heart. And I spend a lot of my time talking about reinvention, understanding it, and helping people transition through big periods of change in their life and their business. And Arlene has done that not only for herself, but for the companies that she's created and invested in over the better part of the last 25 or so years, probably more.
Wow.
And if you follow her on LinkedIn, you'll notice, and part of what I appreciate most about her leadership is that she stands by it. She does what she says, and she says what she does. So from the content she creates, to the decisions that she makes, to the businesses that she supports with her money, to the ones that she starts, she is someone who is self-motivated and who invests financially and emotionally in the development of people and products that she really believes in. And I've learned a lot about being a woman in business, about leadership, about change from her books, from, I've met her, I've had the privilege of meeting her at an event, the private event that we did. And she's someone who I will constantly turn to as a little bit of a guiding force when I feel like a little bit lost, or just curious about what that next step is. We talked about curiosity, of planting the seed of, hey, what's the best that can happen? She's someone who I constantly find myself gravitating towards to see what has she done lately and what is she doing next, because I get a lot of inspiration from her.
Cool. I always appreciate the different answers people come up with, but when they come up with someone that they don't necessarily know personally, I'm always fascinated, because it's like, why? And now I got to go check this person out, so that brings someone else into my purview.
Yeah. And I think, it's what's nice too is she is a speaker. She is a businesswoman. She does a lot of the things that I aspire to continuously improve at. And I would say there are a lot of people who I know firsthand who have inspired me greatly, but I also like to think about who has informed my views, the way I think, act, and feel, the way I show up in the world so powerfully, and who I may never have this kind of personal level relationship with.
Yeah.
And that reminds me of what's possible, you with this podcast, and everyone who has, a desire to create something that exists outside of them, that level of impact is possible for them. And I find that so cool.
Yes, it is. Mm-hmm. We all are so much more powerful than maybe we realize sometimes.
Exactly.
Samantha, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for joining me today.
My pleasure. It's been wonderful. I adore you and love this podcast. I can't wait to see what comes next.
Woohoo! It could be anything. You never know. It's always exciting. We never really know, but it'll be something for sure.
I love it.
Many thanks to my audience. Thank you for listening. Please like, subscribe, and comment so we can keep this conversation going. And until next time, show some empathy.